Now we're going to start talking about the deforming section, the moment where we're going to definitely start changing the mesh, the structure of this static mesh. So at this moment, when we get into the mesh that we created a moment ago, we select the mesh, we inspect, and we can see that this mesh is very, very basic. Now, if we go to the deform object, for the deform tool, and let's say that I want to sculpt this object using the vertex, I can only move the elements that are associated with the vertex. And as you can see, the transform that I can do to this mesh is very limited. It's nothing very much. There are not so many changes I can do. And the reason of that is because we have a mesh that doesn't have enough geometry. We need to add more geometry to change a mesh. Now, let's say that I want to add more geometry, and this is when all these tools are going to combine. So I select the object and I select the mesh, and let's take the option of remesh. This will add a lot of geometry, but let's say that, I'm very concerned about how many triangles we have here. So let's say that instead of 5,000, I will go to 1,000. And then I accept. Now the geometry of this object is totally different. And if I go to the deform, and let me complete here. If I go to the deform and select the vertex, now I can start changing the geometry of this object more easily and with more context of how this is going to look at the end. Depending on the amount of triangles that I have that I can work with. You can add the geometry in terms. You can play with this sculpt tool in two different ways. If you click, you're going to pull the sculpture, and if you shift and then click, you are going to do the exact opposite. So you're going to move the mesh inside instead of outside. So as you can see here, you can play a lot between these two tools until you get exactly what you are looking for. Let me show you some tricks related to this as well. The other trick is not a trick, it's part of the settings, is that you have the sculpt brush or the shift, which I mentioned a moment ago. And you can also define the strength of these changes that you're going to do. In my case, right now we have 0.5 and 0.5 for every operation. But let's say I want to move it to 0.1 and 0.1 to the other operation. Now, when I try to sculpt, as you can see, it's more subtle, more soft. You have more control about the structure about the sculpting that you are creating. So this is a very interesting process. I encourage you to try it and see what kind of things you can create. You can create even rocks, any kind of formation. In fact, you can create even a sculpt, literally a sculpt of probably a character that is going to do something that is going to look pretty cool. Now, once you finish this process, you go and accept. And as you accept, you can see now the sculpt I created a moment ago. Of course, this sculpt is related to the amount of the triangles, which is basically the geometry that defines this object. If you want to give more details to the geometry, well, now you know that you only need to go to mesh and add more elements to this mesh. Following with the vertex sculpt, you also have the option of defining, of course, the size for the brush if you want to reduce the size, or you can also have define how the fall off is going to be. So these are different types of designs depending on what you want to create with the sculpture that you are playing with. So let's say that I want this box linear, and then I can move this object into another kind of design. So I invite you to test all the different tools until you find the one that is going to answer the requirements that you might have. Now, let's combine all these elements that we have learned so far. Let me add a bit, some elements of a sculpting here, here, and here. And as you can see, we are using part of this geometry, but not all the elements of the geometry. So let me show you one thing. Let's say that I accept this object, and now I'm going to the mesh. And you remember that we have this option of simplify a mesh. Right now, our mesh, if we inspect our mesh, we have this structure, and as you can see, here are all your triangles around. Now, if I want to simplify the mesh, I can select the minimal shape preserving and accept this. And now, as you can see on the bottom, you reduce the number of triangles because you are not using it for the meshing, for the sculpting that you are creating. And this is part of the small recommendations and tricks that you can have in consideration when sculpting an object using Unreal. And man, they're really amazing tools for avoiding you extra load for the processor trying to rendering this particular object that you created.